Well, hello there. Welcome to the JAGGY THISTLE Podcast. Kenny Farquharson here in Edinburgh, very damp Edinburgh. It's a bit drizzle outside. Drizzle. I made up that word a few years ago, kind of a portmanteau word, dismal and drizzle. Drizzle. It hasn't quite caught on yet. It's not really in a contender for the Oxford English Dictionary yet, but I live in hope. So in a dismal Edinburgh, I'm here talking to you about Scottish politics and Scottish culture. As always, you can always email me here at thejaggythistle@substack.com if you have any questions on what I'm talking about. Please subscribe to this channel, depending on what you're listening on or what you're watching on, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or Substack itself. Check out what I've been doing on Substack recently. I had a long essay about the great American short story writer Raymond Carver, and a master of that concise, precise, controlled kind of fiction where brevity is everything, and kind of the concision of it is really impressive. So I'm fascinated by Carver, and so there's a wee essay about him on the JAGGY Thistle. If you like that kind of thing, if you want to try it out, find the JAGGY Thistle on Substack. But today we're going to talk about a kind of a fundamental issue on Scottish politics. We're heading into we are in the thick of the Holyrood election campaign. The voting day is May the 7th. We're hurtling towards it as we speak. But you know, as we are kind of battered by all the kind of various daily hand-to-hand combat of the campaign and what have you, I want to stand back from it a little bit and ask a very fundamental question. You know, is the Parliament that we're going to elect on May the 7th, is that Parliament, or will that Parliament accurately reflect, will it be an accurate mirror image of political opinion in this country? You know, that's the minimum we can hope for, I think, from an electoral system. Will the Parliament we elect be a mirror image of opinion in the country at large? And I'm afraid my answer to that is no. Because if you look at the most recent polling, if that polling was reflected in the outcome on May the 7th, the result would not be a mirror image of Scottish public opinion. It would be a hideous distortion of Scottish public opinion. The election would not have done its most basic job. You've got one job, electoral system. It will not have done that job. And let me explain. The most recent polling for the Holyrood election was done by YouTube a few days ago. YouTube? YouGov. What an idiot. What an idiot. YouGov, not YouTube. YouTube is not a polling company, as far as I know. You know, see, if this was a professional podcast, this would be edited out, you see. You know, but this is not a professional podcast. This is a deliberately shonky podcast with me just burbling away to camera with no editing and no music and no high production values whatsoever. So forgive me for that. YouGov, the latest YouGov polling, has been really interesting. And let me tell you, basically what it said. I made a note of this. It had the SNP. So you get two votes in the Scottish Parliament, a constituency vote and the regional list vote. On the constituency vote, the SNP had 34% of the vote, just over a third. On the list vote, the SNP had 29%, quite a bit less than a third. Regardless of this, if you reflected that in the number of seats that the SNP is likely to win in the Scottish Parliament, on those numbers, the SNP would win 46.5% of the seats, almost half. In fact, it's by no means impossible. In fact, it's entirely plausible that come May the 7th, the SNP could win a majority of seats in the Scottish Parliament with less than a third of the vote. And that is extraordinary. That is an extraordinary state of affairs. It's a failure of the electoral system. It's a slap in the face for the principles of accountability and proportionality that were meant to be at the heart of the devolution project. It, I think, undermines the whole kind of bond of trust between the voter and the political system, where the minimum that a voter is entitled to expect is that their vote will be reflected in the parliament that's meant to represent them, the national parliament of Scotland that's meant to represent them. So you've got I think we're in danger of fracturing that trust. But where is the outcry about this? There isn't any. Where is the kind of uproar at this threat to the democratic legitimacy of the Scottish Parliament? There isn't any. Normal politics carries on as usual with the hand-to-hand combat of press releases and speeches and what have you. The question of whether the entire process is legitimate and fit for purpose is not an issue in this campaign, and I think that's extraordinary. And when somebody like me talks about this, says these things, there's a kind of Farquharson would say that is always whittering on about this kind of thing, do we, in what possible world would such a kind of naive and slightly a tad bizarre view, in what possible world would we just kind of ditch the electoral system and get a new one? Well, I'll tell you what possible world that's possible in. The Welsh world. Because the Welsh Parliament on May the 7th this year will be elected under an entirely different electoral system than it was before. The Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament, when they opened in 1999, were elected on the same electoral systems. A system called AMS. We needn't go into the details of it just now, but Scotland and Wales had identical systems. But at this next election, Wales has decided to ditch the system Scotland uses and have an entirely new system. An entirely new system that is more proportional, it's simpler, it's more transparent, it's more kind of, legible to the voter. And it will produce a more proportional parliament where the people elected to the Welsh Senedd better reflect the actual political makeup of the Welsh nation. And how have they done that? Let me tell you how they've done that. I mean, in Wales, they recognised that there was two problems with devolution, two particular problems. One is they didn't have enough members for the increased responsibilities that the Parliament has. And secondly, that one party that dominated in the constituency contests for the Welsh Parliament. As I said, 2 votes, one for constituencies, one for additional members on the lists. Any party that dominated in the constituencies was always going to dominate the Parliament because there wasn't enough votes or seats. There wasn't enough seats under the list system to offset the strength of that party, in Wales, the Labour Party, in the constituencies. There wasn't enough. The proportionality mechanism didn't work, and it was always the Labour Party in Wales, which had dominated the country for a century or more, that was always going to win in those situations. And they recognised, not least the Labour Party recognised, that this was unsustainable and fed a kind of distrust and cynicism about politics. So they introduced this new system. It's if you're a bit of a geek and you want to look into it, it's called the closed list system, where everyone just has one vote. None of this kind of constituency vote, an additional member vote, which very few Scots actually understand in its full implications, to be honest. You would just have one vote, and much simpler. The constituency boundaries, same as Westminster, no confusion there either. Much more simple, much more legible, much more democratic, because it produces a more democratic, accurate, proportional outcome. Now, regular listeners to me and regular readers will know this isn't the first time that I've looked to Cardiff for some inspiration about Scottish politics. And I think we have to be kind of open about this. We are not the kind of the fount of all wisdom on devolution or anything else, frankly. We have to be prepared to look beyond our boundaries and look to countries with nations with similar arrangements to us and see if there's anything we can learn from them, both in policy terms and in structural terms. And on this in particular, I think Wales has a couple of things to offer us. If you want to look back in previous podcasts, I talk about how the Welsh Labour Party and the Welsh nationalists, Plaid Cymru, have been able in the past to form alliances in government, okay, across that Labour nationalist divide, in the Welsh national interest, and that they may be called upon to do so again after May, to freeze out reform from any functional role in Welsh politics and in Welsh government. I argued at that time that the Scottish nationalists and the Scottish Labour Party should be prepared to do the same, to form alliances in the Scottish national interest to freeze out reform from any role in government. Now that may be a moot point given the strength of the SNP in this campaign, but I think it's still worth bearing in mind. And, let's be prepared to look out with our own boundaries, our own borders, for lessons to make Scottish politics, make Scottish democracy a better place, and a place which counters the cynicism about politics in the world at the moment. You just have to look at the headlines, all these awful stories about Peter Mandelson being betraying his colleagues in the Labour Party and the Labour government, and betraying, frankly, the British people by sharing details of financially sensitive information with Jeffrey Epstein. And this is what this does is it's corrosive to trust in politics and the political system, and in that, given that, I think we have to be particularly careful that everything else about our politics serves to kind of build trust in politics. And for me, that includes the fundamentals of the electoral system, of how we do the basic job of electing people to the Scottish Parliament. And just now, as I say, I think we're in grave danger of just letting an unacceptable situation carry on because we seem to be allergic to common purpose and working together in cooperation across party lines in Scotland. Now, there's still plenty of time here in the Scottish election campaign. We're only in early February now. There's still plenty of time before the manifestos come out. There's still plenty of scope for, say, one of Scotland's think tanks or a group of academics to get together to work on a wording that can go in the manifestos of all the parties who are willing to work together to improve the democracy of the Scottish Parliament and commit the next Parliament to looking at this on a cross-party basis to see what improvements can be made, to look at the Welsh experience, to see if that has followed through on its promise. And there may be glitches, who knows, but to look at that experience and ask, could something similar be done here in Scotland to simplify the process, make the process more accountable, make the process more proportional, make the process more legible to the voters. There's still scope for the Scottish political parties to put this kind of wording, to agree a wording, put it in their manifestos and get things done in the next Scottish Parliament. And let's ask ourselves, are we really so divided in Scotland that what the Welsh have done is beyond our capabilities as a Scottish polity? Are we really incapable of that kind of very basic kind of discussion about our democracy? We've had these discussions in the past. We had them through the late 80s and the 90s, through the Scottish Constitutional Convention. We had them in the various commissions that looked at devolution over the last 20 years, notably the Smith Commission. We have, on occasion, been able to speak to each other about the fundamentals of our democracy. I think this is another occasion where that is required to make sure that we are as prepared as we can be, as shipshape, as watertight as Scottish politics can be, in the face of the rising tide of cynicism and misinformation and people who don't have democracy, don't hold with the principles of parliamentary democracy and are cynical about the very nature of our political process. So there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity for the Scottish political leaders, including the Tories. Tories were not involved in the process in Wales, unfortunately. But there's no reason why the Tories can't be involved in this time, in looking beyond their own narrow self-interest and doing something for the Scottish national interest, for the Scottish common good. So that's my little spiel for you today. As always, I'm grateful for your feedback. The email address again, it's the Jaggy Thistle at Substack.com. Please subscribe on the platform you're on, and let me know what you think of these podcasts. Feedback's good. The Jaggy Thistle, as I always say, is a community and a conversation. I'm always grateful to listen to you. Also, you'll find a written version of the ideas in this column in my column in the Times this week. I'm a columnist with the Times newspaper. I write about Scottish politics. Many of you might know that, but some of you might not. I write about Scottish politics. I have a weekly column. I've done that every week now for about 11 years in the pages of the world's greatest newspaper. Great privilege to do so. So if you want to kind of read this as well as listen to it, the Times is the place to go for that. And I'll put a link in the show notes for this podcast. So thank you for bearing with me to the end. Thank you for listening. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.